Wednesday. Choosing blog posts to read on Saturday and having to really comb through to find ones that aren't me whining about my health. Nobody wants to hear me discuss my mostly self-inflicted physical pain. I also don't know if I'll even do the reading on Saturday, if there's enough ibuprofen and or tiger balm in the world to make it enjoyable. Currently the one drawer is a Uyghur restaurant near Camden Arts Centre I've been wanting to try for months, in part to right the ethical wrongs of taking so much money from China recently, and in part because it looks like a finer cuisine than that of its oppressor. Ain't this always the way? I would know, I'm British. Unfortunately, I learned later that the Uyghur restaurant has moved to Walthamstow, and to add insult to injury, now resides on Hoe Street. For those who care, my MRI and X-ray are normal, save for a small cyst on my liver that nobody seems worried about. I know from American friends who get full-body MRIs every year that they are like catnip for hypochondriacs, constantly revealing perfectly normal abnormalities that keep specialists in business. It is a relief in some ways that my spine and the spaces between my ribs and the ribs themselves are not inflamed or damaged. In other ways it's depressing, because the pain is still the pain, and I still need someone to reupholster my entire back. I treat myself to some painting at the studio even though I shouldn't, before Gordon and Katie from Michael Werner come over to pick works for Los Angeles. An hour prior to their arrival, I hear a bad fight from somewhere in the yard, a sound I know so well, usually resulting in my seeing someone with a badly bloodied face and a damaged vehicle when I go to the corner shop. I'm in such a bad mood that I'm ready to bloody Katie's face for turning up to my studio sick and sucking loudly on a throat lozenge. And I'm ready to bloody Gordon's face for saying he didn't have any medical problems until his 40s. But I also don't discriminate between art dealers. I was ready to bloody Vanessa's face last week for loving Shanghai, while I felt nothing but disappointment and agony there. There is nobody I won't hurt when I'm this miserable. We choose the work for LA more than we need, and I notice that I don't like any of the work in the studio because I haven't made it in the last 4 days. I'm a passive participant in conversation, sad and worried and wanting to be left alone, but also never be alone again. Gordon, in his earth sign Taurus pragmatism, reels off a list of doctors in America he wants me to see. Ones that will spin your blood and replace it and change your life through holistic approaches and pharmaceuticals. Naturally, after the dentist debacle of August 2024, I am extra coy about Gordon's recommendations. But I would also totally do it if things got dire enough. And I totally wouldn't tell my mother, who, as a doctor, during her 30 years in medicine, has seen the worst and goriest possible outcome of every procedure under the sun. This means she largely cares for me by fearfully micromanaging, making me afraid of almost everything that isn't the NHS. I'd definitely bloody her face too if the timing was right, but then I remember that distinct feeling I had in Shanghai last week that I shared with Jed, of wanting my mom. At home I rarely get this feeling. I find a hot bath with magnesium sulfate while scrolling the back pain subreddit is the perfect stand-in for a mother's embrace. And speaking of parents, Jed sends me a New York Times article titled "The Unspoken Grief of Never Becoming a Grandparent." Not so unspoken, after all, given the interviews to the literal paper of record. I ought to have guessed this would be the new frontier of baby boomer victimhood. The comment section is going off, Jed writes, and he's not wrong. One says, "Perhaps if boomers created a world that made having children feasible, I would have one." And another says, "Oh, the unspoken grief of never owning a home." "Baby boomers are constantly trying to eat from the garden they never tended to," says one. "Oh look, consequences," says another. It does bring me a kind of righteous joy, though since most of the comments are fiscal in nature, I have no such excuse for not giving my mother the grandchildren she craves because I run this scam called painting. If I don't do it, it won't be because of money. Vanessa sometimes likes to tell me I want children in an accusatory tone. She doesn't. I made the mistake of saying in Shanghai that I wouldn't have an abortion if I got pregnant, and she grilled me on various horrific caveats involving alleyway rape and Down syndrome diagnoses. All this while Jed scrolled his phone, getting progressively more upset about the election. And perhaps with American reproductive rights being what they are, baby boomers will have their wish granted finally. A contemporary baby boom of their own. Grandchildren sprouting from one-night stands or incest or whatever. I've upset a lot of people recently by surmising that Trump won't be as bad for America as people think, if only because this implies America isn't already bad. I do think Trump's pathetic, but I don't quite think he's Hitler. And I think the young woman who killed her father with an ice axe as an act of liberation after the election win had probably been on too online for too long. I also say hack your father to bits on a random Tuesday if you so desire. There's no election needed. In the evening I watch Emily in Paris, testament to my mental state at the time, which settles me. A couple of half-finished paintings in the studio that weren't there this morning. At least now the back pain feels for a good cause and not totally outside of my control. I'm discovering the topical anti-inflammatory Voltarol. I don't think I can say this.
Say it.
I'm discovering that Rosa Parks' husband had a car. I'm discovering that people have herniated discs at 23, and that you can get an outdoor haircut in Angel and Islington if you're homeless. And that this blog is probably unreadable by now for many reasons, but it helps me a great deal, and I'm selfish. I'll do one more. This was... this was a day that my ex-boyfriend committed a moderate indiscretion. Friday, and do I have a story for you? This is literally me to like my mom and 2 people who read this blog. Firstly, my roof is fucked up. The roofer comes down my ladder with a pessimistic look on his face. He also sings God's Plan by Drake while fetching tools, so I guess it's clear which side he's on vis-a-vis the recent beef. I don't tell him that. If forced to choose, I'm Team Kendrick all day. I don't tell him in case the beef is close to his heart and he sabotages my roof repair because of it. He patches it so it won't leak in between now and the real job. I can look forward to more strange men in my living quarters in the near future, I guess. True extravagance would of course be having a second, near-identical home nearby that I can move into when the first home needs work. I imagine bringing this proposal to my accountant and I laugh. Jago comes over in the late afternoon to catch up. We smoke and I tell him about the trans porn I watched recently and he tells me about his book. We discuss our very similar British schooling and the weapons other kids built to assault each other. The early exposure to heinous videos on school computers before the faculty figured out how to block certain sites. We talk sex and geopolitics, the gift of being able to work quickly. In fact, I tell Jago I got in some hot water with an older painter in my Pilates class this week, who arrived despairing over one of her works being damaged by shippers in transit. 7 months of work for nothing, she said. It's with the conservator now. Well, that's your problem, I said unsolicited. My painting should take 7 months. And I stand by this. So few things in life should be worked on for 7 months, and so many things can be finished in a week. A damaged painting that took a few days is going to hurt so much less than one that took half a year. And things will always get damaged. You can't trust anybody. But you can learn to paint fast, I think. Jago leaves to attend the opening of a new lesbian bar. He asks if I want to come, and I tell him I do, but I have a headache, which is true. I go back to work, and at around 5:30 p.m., Ariel calls me from LA. He's at the gun store next to his recording studio in LA. He holds a gun up to the camera and says, should I buy this? And I tell him he already has a gun. Jago and I had been talking about famous people we dreamt of meeting before they died, and I told him my main regret was not meeting handbag designer Judith Lieber. I had fetched the swan-shaped Minaudier from my studio shelves, a gift from Larry Gagosian when he was trying to court me. Jago had studied the bag carefully and left it on my desk. Ariel spies it now in the background of our FaceTime and asks what it is. I tell him about Judith Lieber and he Googles her. He shares his screen and we look at her bags together on first dibs. I tell Ariel about my roof and my worries about being robbed by someone crawling into my attic. Ariel is half listening. He does not realize he's still sharing his screen, and I suddenly see him open an app that I recognize as Hinge, that wavy letter H logo. It takes a moment for my brain to register what's going on. I wonder briefly whether I'm having a stroke. I watch Ariel scroll speedily through dozens of young women in the app, mostly California-based. I realize he doesn't know I can see it, and I can barely compute that I'm seeing it. I feel like my stomach is full of ice cubes suddenly. I watch my screen for 9 seconds or so before I tell him politely that I think he's still sharing his screen. Oh, he says. Naturally, it does not take long for me to cry, because I spend most of my life on the brink of tears nowadays anyway, because I'm coming off of sertraline. And so a lot of his panic justifications don't really land. I sort of just tune it out. Somehow I seem more mortified than he is, if that's possible. And usually I would take great pleasure in watching a man panic, but this time it's weirdly hideous to watch. Perhaps I'm growing out of it. I don't even really want the moral high ground anymore. I kind of just want them to be a bit less idiotic. The whole thing forces a conversation about us between Ariel and I that should probably not have happened over FaceTime, but does. On the bright side, I get to ask him all the questions I felt too afraid to ask in recent weeks. Things like, are you fucking other women even though you said you wouldn't? And when are you even coming back to London? Questions I worried might come across as jealous or neurotic, that are magically forgivable when the other party has been this gross and disrespectful. And it is a respect thing, I think. Ariel's excuses run the gamut from it's a reflex/nervous habit to I have a phone addiction. I have barely been single my whole adult life. I'm still understanding how to use the app. He's 46. He tells me it's not about me at all in that way that somehow always sounds cruel even if it's true. And it was a little about me since I was on the call. 2 hours pass, enough that I should have bought bike lights to cycle home. Before he runs to band rehearsals, Ariel makes a joke about arranging a threesome with one of the Hinge women. He is flailing. I'm disgusted. My friend Naomi later agrees that one day we will laugh at all of this, but today is not the day. At home I call all the rest of my best friends, who I'm lucky to have. We unpack all the ways in which it's not so bad, and all the ways in which it's pretty bad, and all the ways in which it's kind of very bad. In the end I land on simply day ruining.